Hello, everyone, and welcome back to, whatever it is I named this series. What did I name this series? Occult Lessons! It's been a long weekend. As most of y'all know, yesterday I had to stop and put my entire system back together because the stream setup wasn't working, which is why I didn't stream. But, it's fixed now. We're all good. So yeah, that's good to know. Welcome, Xavier, Pink Cupcakes, Jeff, Julie, Joe, Zach, Handsome Ratch, Lobsel. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This week, we're going to kind of jump back a little bit since we've had a couple episodes where I talked specifically about certain things like numerology or, various historical things. This time is going to be a little bit more of a general overview of Western occultism and their history, their philosophy, and all that jazz. It'll actually deal with Europe and the Middle East because a lot of various philosophies and occult traditions were really created from a mixture of both of those cultures at certain points in history. Starting with, the Jewish people migrating through the world and spreading into Europe and bringing their ideas and their literature, Christianity coming from them and coming into Europe, and then eventually various wars and things will bring it back to the east and then back west, and it's kind of like a game of hot potato where these various schools of thought are being traded back and forth between different people. So what do we talk about when we say occultism? It's really a very broad thing back in the ancient times because, like I said last week, scientists and religious students were the same people in those days. In our modern age, we tend to separate science and religion and occult things, like all those things are considered separate. In the ancient times, they were the same thing. So what we're really talking about here is the history of how people studied the world and how it worked, and it was seen through the viewpoint of their religion. We're going to start with ancient Greece because that's really where most of Western civilization comes from and a lot of their ideas came from. Will I ever do a lesson on Scientology? Oh no. Somebody last week did ask about secret religions, which one day we may do. So that might be a fun one to talk about all those weird branch things. Well, I hope that doesn't put me on anything. Hey, Cygnus. Hey, Lord Dalloway. So yeah, starting in ancient Greece in ye olden days, you have the origins of what we would call occult studies. The traditions of power in names, power in numbers, power in prayer and spoken word come from this time. You think of the idea that a name can curse someone because the name was believed to have in it the identity of a person, that if you had their name, you had control of who they were. These kind of ideas kind of came from Greece and their culture, specifically the Greek and later Roman gods. That's also very heavily involved with Egypt because eventually, Alexander the Great got this cool idea in his head to conquer the world, and he took over Egypt, and all those cultures kind of got fused together. The heart of all this is Alexandria, which was the city that he built because he wanted a city built for himself, and it was built in Egypt. This became the center of all kinds of study, science, religion. It was a mesh of everything. All kinds of religious groups came here. Throughout history, there tends to be one big city that everybody kind of centered around and was able to explore their own cultures and identity and history and things. And Alexandria was it for this point in history. They had the world's first lighthouse, the tallest lighthouse in the world. I do not believe it's standing anymore, unfortunately. Only the base is left. They had the Library of Alexandria, which was the first research library in the world, which unfortunately was burned several times, and then eventually when the Middle Eastern, the Islamic folks invaded, the general in charge was asked, hey, what do you want to do with this library? And he said, we don't need it, we have the Quran. And they burned it. Well, luckily, a lot of other scholarly folks that came with him said, oh, wait a minute, no, we want those. And they ended up taking a lot of books with them when they went back east. That's kind of how these kind of ideas spread, was an army would come in and invade, And that would lead to scholars from the place being invaded running away with what they could carry. So they would take their knowledge somewhere else. And then scholars who came with the invading army would get what was left behind and say, oh, cool, this is neat. And then they'd take it home. That's how the Middle East kind of got involved with a lot of stuff in Europe. So Alexandria is this huge place. We haven't destroyed it yet. We're going to talk first about what they did before it got destroyed. Specifically, the mystery religions, which is kind of the first, when you think about groups of like occult and religious ecstasy and things like that, that's what the mystery religions were. The idea was, well, we don't know a lot concretely because they didn't really write things down. There were various cults based around specific gods in the pantheons of Greece or Rome or Egypt. And on weekends, they would all get together and party hard based on the god that they worshipped. And that was called the mystery religions because it was all kept very secret. Only the initiated was allowed to know the secrets. You think of the kind of Dionysus, the things he was known for, the revelry of wine and partying. Those were the mystery religions. It was an excuse to get together and party. But it was one of the early versions of kind of the secret culty kind of aspect of occultism. That's where that sort of began with. Before them was the Gnostics, which we talked about a little last week, but they weren't really that connected. Or wait, was Gnostics? No, they came from the mystery. I'm getting so confused because I haven't read all my notes today. Anyway, there was this theory from this period of time known as the ancient primal religion. The idea that there's one source of all these mystery religions, one source of every tradition in the world. Most people have basically said there's no physical way that's true, but still, even today, there's a lot of people that like the idea that there's one ancient primal source of these histories. We can't prove that. There's no way to prove that, but it's one of the core ideas of occultism is the idea that if you trace all these different ideas, Kabbalah, Greece, all that stuff back, you get to one source. And a lot of people over time have tried to prove they found the source. No, there's no way. They also believed in emotions as a source of power. That was where the idea of, not only just prayer, but your feelings had force to them, which was why, if you got angry at someone, you could use your feelings to curse them, or you could pray and your feelings of love would help them, that kind of thing. There was a thing called the doctrine of opposites, which we discussed a little with alchemy. The idea that there is an opposite to everything in the world. Handsome Ratch is definitely right. I'm not going to go too much into detail on all that this week, just because this week I have a baby listener.
Hi.
My niece is in here. She wanted to listen to one of my lectures. Phil! I believe it, Phil. Hey, Artzilla, thanks for joining us.
Oh, hi, Phil.
Addie says hi, Phil. Yeah, Handsome Ratch is not wrong. I mean, Alexander, we know for sure, was one of them, but there were plenty in that time period. There was tons. Anyway, the doctrine of opposites basically says you cannot have one without the other. You have yes and no, good and evil, light and dark. As long as there's one thing, there is another thing, and you can use that doctrine of opposites to kind of use them in your forces. If you knew what the opposite of something was and you wanted to invoke it, you could use the opposites as part of that initiation. A similar idea was the system of correspondences, which came back from the idea that they thought that the planets influenced the world, and each of the planets had an emotion associated with them. They had metals associated with them, all kinds of things associated with each planet. So say you were going to battle and you want to win. So Mars is the planet of war and its color is red. Well, then you need to wear some red color because that's the color of Mars, which is the planet of war. That's the idea behind the system of correspondences, which would only grow and grow and grow over the years as people kind of tied the system into other things like... Yes, they did name the planets after the Roman gods because they believed that the gods were out there in outer space.
Yes.
and that's the stars were really.
Greek and Roman stuff is my favorite.
I know. I thought you liked Norse too.
Yeah, Norse too.
Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Yes, as above, as below is one of the theories that mainly comes from alchemy, but all these things kind of fuse together because the alchemist was also the scientist, was also the, they were all studying the same things. The idea there was that the world above us, outer space, influences the world below, so as above, so below, kind of everyone says hi, Addie.
Hello.
They kind of defined how you interact with the world. Like if I'm trying to think of an example, but if something is one way in outer space, well then the corresponding thing down here is going to be the same. Is my niece coloring? Yes, she is. She is painting or something.
I'm drawing with Sharpies. I'm drawing the planets because we're talking about planets.
Yeah. Alright. So they believed that emotions had power. They believed that the planets influenced us and had power. They believed that the sun was the most important one, that the life force came from the sun, which makes sense, given that, it does. You can see that through plants and through all kinds of things. A lot of their ideas were really very close to science, but just a little bit off,
I drew the sun.
Oh, thank you. That's very cool. Let's see. So that's what I was getting at. So all these things that they believed had forces and energy and stuff, they thought tied into actual spirits, which influenced those ideas, which later on would be called angels and demons. Japan has Shinto, which has similar ideas there. I love that if you compare a lot of these things the world over, they all have a lot of similar ideas. So if Venus is in retrograde, it reminds me of somebody that made a hilarious joke about, oh man, this month's going to be terrible because Venus is in Gatorade. Made me laugh so much. So another thing we got to talk about in general theories about the idea of occultism and magic and stuff is the idea of imitation, imitative. Things that are like. If it is similar to something, it's going to behave the same way as the thing it's similar to. Trying to think another example of this. Basically, if you set something on fire that looks like a person, then that person's gonna start itching. That's the idea of what imitation is. All these ideas kind of came from their way of looking at the universe and kind of getting ideas of science, kind of seeing things like, oh, the sun makes the plants grow. It's magic! Like, they kind of got it a little bit, but they didn't have enough scientific know-how to really figure it out. This was their way of starting to explore the world and solve these kind of things. So all this stuff was going down in Alexandria, all these various ideas. Plato and Aristotle were huge influences in all this. Sophocles, who came before them, those folks, their studies passed on through the generations, not very many generations at this point in Alexandria, but they were all very big. I have not explained that difference yet, Joe, but we'll get there. So they're all coming together in Alexandria, and lots of people are exploring these ideas and developing them, and it's a pretty great place to do it, because right at this point in history, Alexandria is pretty open-minded. The unfortunate trend is that as time passes, that changes in almost every one of these cities. It'll start off as really open-minded as new people come in and bring new ideas, and then eventually, like 100 years later, a new emperor will say, no, I don't like that idea. And a lot of this stuff gets chased out of town. And specifically in this case, what happens is Alexandria falls to invasion from the Middle East, from what is the Ottoman Empire at the time, I believe, which is Islamic, the area of what's now Turkey, and they come in and they invade, and for the most part, there's kind of a division here where they destroy what they find, but there are also scholars who take things and books and research and bring them back home with them. No, it definitely can't fit everything. This is a brief overview. There are folks who try and escape and run away from this invasion, and there are folks who try to who come with the invasion and try and bring stuff back with them. Let me flip to my page here.
I drew the planets, but I drew the ones I could remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go. So, now that Alexandria has fallen, we're going to get a new city, which I'm trying to remember the name of. Here we go. This should be it.
Wasn't it the here's the planet spaceship.
Oh, thank you.
I can give it to you.
Here we go. This is where it is. The syncretism. So this is where you start to see the rise of alchemy when they head over to the east. And actually, the word alchemy, one idea behind where the word comes from is that it comes from the Arabic alchemy, out of Egypt, because Alexandria was Egypt and it fell, and they brought all this research back with them. The idea being that they brought alchemy back with them to the Middle East. For the next couple hundred years or so, we are in the golden age of Islam, which means Europe has kind of gone, the Roman Empire is going to start falling apart, Alexander dies and it splits in half, their society's kind of going downhill a little, Islam is on the rise, they've got all the science and cool research and stuff going on. Which city was it? It doesn't say here. But they take what they took from Alexandria, the alchemy research, the Gnostic research, the Greek and Roman stuff. They take all that and they keep researching with it while, Greece is kind of, oh, what are we doing? Everything's falling apart. And actually Hermes Trismegistus, who I talked about in the alchemy video, he's supposed to be the forefather of alchemy. The one version of his big alchemy emerald tablet that we have is translated from Arabic. We don't have the original Latin version, and a lot of stuff in that time period that we still have that's been saved was saved first by the people that took it back home with them to the Ottoman Empire. It would have been lost otherwise because it was burned when the Library of Alexandria was burned.
Why is everybody resolved to burn anything?
Yeah, people can be closed-minded. Sufis are basically mystics of Islam. You're not entirely wrong. That's kind of what they're seen as. They have a lot more sort of mystic shamanism-esque kind of beliefs compared to traditional Islam.
So, like Doctor Strange?
No. Not quite, sweetheart. All right. Haran, Harran. That was the new philosophical center. Once everybody fled Alexandria, Haran was the new place. And it was a pretty cool place. It was basically known as the pagan city because everybody was allowed to come in and kind of believe what they want and study what they want. And this was at a time when the Ottoman Empire wasn't exactly going to let you do whatever you wanted. They had a list, and you could follow these traditions and study this stuff, and that was cool. And they went to Haran and said, well, what do you guys do? And they said, we are Haran. We do our own thing. And they're like, oh, okay, fine, you do your own thing. And so for a while, you have all the new kinds of philosophical and alchemical studies coming from them and being saved by them. So all this, think about the stuff that we know of today, of people like Plato and all that kind of stuff, saved by the people that invaded and took stuff back home with them. Really, not saved by the people who did the invasion, so much as the other, the intelligentsia of the culture who said, wait, don't destroy this stuff, we want it. Let's see. One of the consequences of the Arabic invasion and the consequent moving of research and all to the Middle East is that you see all this stuff getting really heavily influenced by what's called Zoroastrianism. I never say this word out loud, so who knows if I said it right.
I think you did, because we learned about it in history, I think.
Well, thank you. It is a very ancient religious tradition that influenced Judaism really heavily once, and other occult traditions, once they moved and got into contact with it more heavily. It's got this idea, basically, that the world is divided in between dark and light, good and evil. It's really heavily focused on the idea of the battle between good and evil. And that dualism heavily influenced these traditions, especially Christianity, because they really liked the idea of, oh, it's a war between good and evil. This explains everything, because if there is good, there must be evil.
Yes.
Let's see here.
God and the devil, and they eternally fight until God wins.
There you go. Alright. So, we have this golden age for a while. Everything gets saved and kind of kept together by the folks in Haran and all. It doesn't last forever. They start getting, you're not allowed to do this kind of stuff anymore. And what ends up happening kind of next in the big picture is the Crusades.
Yay! I like
Unfortunately, the Crusades is a long time of the Middle East and the Europeans stabbing each other to death. But what happens is these cultures become incredibly intertwined, especially on the border, and the two religious groups in the poorer regions in the ordinary society are intertwined and begin to study each other's works. People begin to take things back and forth. It actually led to trouble for the Knights Templar. At the end of the war, they go back home and are accused of heresy. There's a lot of reasons for why that happened. Specifically, they ran the banks of Europe. The forerunners of our banks were the Knights Templar, and there was a specific king that owed them a lot of money, and he said, I don't want to pay this money back, and he was friends with the Pope, so he ran to the Pope and said, hey, I think the Knights Templar are bad. But one of the reasons that they were said to be bad was that they had brought heresy with them from the Middle East, and that they worshipped a god named Baphomet, which might have been a mispronunciation or a mistranslation of Muhammad, as in the prophet from Islam. So it's possible that one of the reasons that they were accused of heresy was that some of them had converted to Islam, because they'd been in the Middle East for ages, and, those cultures started spreading and intertwining, but they were accused of a lot of different things, and many of them were burned to death, arrested. This was also the time of the Inquisition, so even those that didn't get immediately arrested afterwards tended to get caught by the Inquisition. So that was the end of the Knights Templar.
Why do they keep burning people? Why is it fire? Why?
Why is it fire? It's a good question. Unfortunately, though they suffered a bad end, they brought a lot of history and things to the Europe again. From, the whole, went from Alexandria to the Middle East, and now the Middle East, with the Crusades and everything, they're starting to spread things back and forth again. After the Crusades, you see a rise in interest in what's considered Hermetic studies, because of the name from Hermes. It was lost for quite a while, and again, the Arab culture saved it, so when eventually it got back, there was this renewed interest in these kinds of things. Around this time, there was a lot of corruption in Europe, and folks didn't like all this corruption. This is kind of the start of the Protestant and the Catholicism thing, and a lot of folks on the sides of society, the occultists, are the ones that really are against these groups. There was a group called the Cathars, who were Christians that did their own thing. They had their own beliefs. They didn't like the Pope, because they said the Pope was corrupt, and that the church was corrupt, and they were taking money and starving the poor and doing bad stuff. They lived in a specific area of France, I think. I don't remember. And they ended up getting persecuted and burned. Yeah.
Again.
They liked burning people back then, sweetheart. I'm sorry.
And one of the history guys turned Christians into candles. Why? Just why?
They had a lot of unique ideas that kind of reflect Gnostic tradition. People have tried to research and see if they go back as far as the Gnostics. They don't. We're pretty sure they don't. But they influenced a lot of occult thought at the time, and possibly the Rosicrucians, which came next. The Rosicrucians don't exist, is the fun thing. They were an occult group who probably were made up by one guy, but he wrote these pamphlets that said, "We are the secret society of occult history, and we don't like the church because they're evil and mean. So you guys should join our occult society and fight the church." And yeah, well, even though so many people were fired up by these pamphlets and interested in them, they could never find the real people that wrote them. But it still it did what the guy wanted, was it got people interested in this kind of research and fighting against the corruption of the church. And because of his pamphlets, Rosicrucian societies were created. So the fake thing that started fake turned real. The name, I believe, comes from the Order of the Rose, I think is what it's called. Let me make sure I'm saying that right. I can't find where I wrote that down. I have too many notes.
I'm drawing a picture for your fans.
Oh, thank you. She said she's drawing a picture for my fans. Let's see here.
I'm almost done.
I am totally jumping all around about the place, but that's fine. I had a much more organized schedule planned for today's topic, and then I had a child. A child interrupted me, and now I'm just tired and distracted. But anyway,
You know
we
what?
can...
You should focus on how people keep burning people.
I should focus on that and talk about why they kept burning people?
Yes, because I want to know why.
They thought it purified them, probably. Probably, I bet. Man. Yeah, I can't find where I wrote down Rosicrucianism, but I'm pretty sure it's something or other. But because that group kind of got willed into existence, even today there are Rosicrucian societies that you can join that study, basically they are interested in the history of the occult and keeping it alive and studying it, which is pretty interesting to me. Another group you probably all heard of is the Freemasons, another keeping the occult history alive group. The Masons were people that built houses, and when you build houses, you can't live in one place, because once you built all the houses in that town, well, they don't need you anymore. So Masons were known for having a very specialized set of skills and having to travel across Europe to keep using those skills. They had specific rules they had to live by based by the church, like they weren't allowed to go to bars and things like that. They had very specialized knowledge in architecture and in design, because a lot of these houses and churches and places they were building would have, special designs and imagery and symbolism put into them. And they had special ways of recognizing other Masons as they met them, special signs and things. And all this stuff kind of came together and built up this really occult kind of energy around them and the way that people saw them, and eventually now we have Freemasons. Freemason, the free part actually referring to a kind of brick they used.
So stonemason?
Yeah. They use the green language, which is a kind of occult language that's existed forever, but they especially use them. And eventually what's called the Illuminati, the idea of the Illuminati, comes from the Freemasons. They kind of get them, the Rosicrucians, the Cathars, all those various groups were basically students of occultism that collected it and researched it. Yes, you're correct. Christian Rosencrantz was the guy that came up with Rosicrucianism. But I'm pretty sure it was actually also called the Order of the Rose or something. I can just Google it. What does Rosicrucian, I can't spell that, mean? It doesn't say what it means.
Man, don't tell the fans, but check it out so far.
Oh, I like it. Okay, it is said to have meant blah 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 blah. It still doesn't say, dang it. Oh well.
Google's very vague.
So, as of that, we have the Freemasons we've covered, we've had... So, all these kind of groups come together and are, keeping their own history and kind of spreading it, and a lot of it's being spread in Europe by the monks. At this point in history, the monks are the ones that write things down way more than anybody else, and they travel from church to church and share what they've written and what they've kept down. So what we know as a cult was really kept by stewards of the church, by the monks, because they wrote everything down. It didn't matter what it was. They valued knowledge, so they saved everything. This is part of why we didn't lose quite a lot of history when Europe kind of had a period where a lot of what was, shared was just oral, and they didn't save anything. And the monks were over here like, oh, we're going to save as much as we can. And what we do have is because of them.
Technically, monks didn't talk, so they would probably just be screaming inside their heads.
So you have all this stuff that's been kind of saved by various traditions for a long time and kept on the fringes of society. Comes from Alexandria to the Middle East, and then back from the Middle East by the Crusades and by the Knights, and spreads around through monks, and basically you have this 1,000 years of history and occult knowledge written down and kept and saved, but not really spread. Like, people aren't really aware of it in general. It takes the Renaissance for for people to really get to know this stuff and for it to be spread and be knowledgeable. It gets used in science and paintings and all kinds of things. I mean, folks like Leonardo were studying this kind of stuff alongside studying science. The Hermetic works were reintroduced at this time, and people believed that what was it? Not the Emerald Tablet, but the other books he wrote were actual examples of the primal religion, which I mentioned earlier was like the one source of all occult knowledge. They thought this was it. Until a little while later, a guy proved it couldn't be because the language it used was too new. It was not old enough to be primal religion. And they were all like, dang it. And for a little while, that actually brought people, they were less interested in the occult because they thought they'd proved it fake. But it kind of waned for a little bit. But during the Renaissance, it was big and huge, and the knowledge started to spread everywhere. It dies down for a little bit, and then at the beginning of like the 20th century, you suddenly just have this huge explosion of interest in the occult and occult societies starting to happen. And it's really wildly like soap opera-esque. Like, these characters are wild. Let's get to, here we go. So what they call the occult revival was 1890 to 1914. There's a bit of a dip in occult stuff with the 2 world wars because everything was horrible and nobody was having any fun because there were world wars. But before that, it was like a huge craze. This one family in the America. Aw, thank you. I love it. She drew this for us. I love it so much. There was this one family in America that claimed they saw a ghost, and suddenly every family in America were claiming that they saw ghosts.
Ghosts aren't real.
There was a big upsurge in people traveling and doing spirit medium stuff and speaking to your ancestors. Like, all this stuff was suddenly coming around because, one, people were interested to learn about it, to see it. They were looking for it as entertainment, and other people were seeing that it was a way to make money. Big, big, big money. It was an interesting time. And there's a lot of very famous figures that you've probably heard of that came from around this area. Have you ever heard of Eliphas Levi? He is a huge figure in modern occult and magic traditions. Unfortunately, he's very wrong about all the things. Everything. He went through a really horrible relationship break. I don't remember if it was a divorce or just a breakup, but it was bad, and he didn't handle it well. And he ended up, I guess, handling his emotions through magic, through researching. He started researching history, especially Judaism and the Kabbalah he loved, but he was not good at Hebrew. He was very bad at Hebrew, so everything he knew about Judaism was very bad, and most later on, and probably also, I don't know if it was as much during his time, but especially after his time, a lot of Jewish researchers were like, this dude is so off, this guy is so wrong. His name is actually supposed to be the Hebrew version of his real name, which I don't think I wrote down his real name here. But the big thing that he introduced was the idea of connecting the tarot and the Kabbalah, the 22 with the 22. There's 22 paths in the Tree of Life, there's 22 cards in the tarot. That's the one big idea that he had that was probably not wrong. And then everything else he thought about and studied was not great because he couldn't read Hebrew. Good job, buddy. If you're going to study something, you should probably know the language that you're reading.
Yeah, I would think that went without saying.
Yes.
Also, I made this too.
Aw, cool. I like it.
At the bottom.
Wasn't the Magician for the Queen. No, that is John Dee, who was a researcher. He came up with Enochian, which is the language of the angels. He had visions, and he had a friend that he worked with. I can't remember the guy's name. Unfortunately, in his later years, I'm pretty sure he died a pauper because there tends to be this turn against, researching these kinds of things, and eventually the royals turned against him, and he ended up penniless and had nowhere to go. But that was John Dee.
Can you ask them if they know anything about angels, since I like to research them?
My niece would like to know if you know anything about angels. So let us know in the comments and the chat. Do you know about angels? Alright, so I think you're adorable. So now we're going to talk about one of my favorites, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, or HPB, or Madame Blavatsky. She was a Russian lady who got married and then left her husband, just was not interested. I don't remember if it was an arranged marriage or not, but she did not care about this guy. They did not hang out, and then they left. She went to the United States and became good friends with some other folks in this kind of field, and was a huge influence in the study of occult in the United States, because she created, alongside her two friends, the Theosophical Society, which was like the first big society before all these other groups came around. Not as famous, but it was the first one. Most of the beginning of her life is unknown, because that's how it always was. Like, they kept this stuff secret. Supposedly, she went on many great adventures across the world, in Egypt and the Middle East and everywhere, especially Tibet, where she met the Secret Masters. This is where we see the beginning of the Secret Masters.
And that's ridiculous.
There's some things that actually say, that kind of prove true some of her journeys. Not all of them. We can't know for sure everywhere she went. But back in that day, it was very hard to get into Tibet, especially for men, white men specifically, just because the country was kind of closed off. But she got in, and supposedly was able to meet with Buddhists and other folks in the country, and learned a lot from them, and then brought what she learned to the United States. She was a big influence in bringing Hinduism and Buddhism to the United States. She was a writer. She wrote a book called Isis Unveiled about her personal experiences, and then later she got called a fraud by this friend of hers who betrayed her, and lots of drama. There was a lot of drama in all these societies. It's wild.
Why don't they make a TV show out of it?
They really should make a TV show out of it. Her big things are, she came up with the idea of the Akashic record. Kind of similar to Levi had an idea of the astral record, the astral light, but she kind of made it a big thing. The idea being that there's this imprint on the universe that has all knowledge in it, and if you can access and read it, you can know all the things. Like the history of things that have been lost, if you can tap into it, you can know history.
Nobody can tap into
The cool thing about her book was that it brought together and synthesized a lot of the research and history that I've been talking about all this over the years. She brought it to the modern age and made it available to everyone, including Buddhism and Hinduism, which really, hadn't been shared in the West at this point. Her book had a big influence on bringing this kind of knowledge to most people. She was Buddhist herself and believed in the primal religion, and spent most of her life in India, I believe. Let's see here. So her group was the Theosophical Society. Two more groups are going to come from that one. The most famous being the Golden Dawn, which is a bunch of drama kings.
Why don't they make up names that actually make sense?
So they the difference between the Theosophical Society and many of the other societies was the Theosophical Society was focused on research and knowledge. The other societies wanted to have wild ritual parties. And they were like, nah, we aren't doing that. And so a lot of folks said, but wild ritual parties. And they went and did their own thing. The Golden Dawn had folks like Aleister Crowley, who's incredibly famous. I believe P.D. Opensky might have been one of them for a while. A lot of these folks jumped around various groups. I know the Irish poet Yeats, I think, was a member of the Golden Dawn for a while. But anyway, so the most famous and important is Aleister Crowley, who was born the year that Eliphas Levi died, and he thought that he was the reincarnation of Levi. He was convinced of this. He's a wild figure. I'm torn between thinking he was a jerk and not as much a jerk, because depending on which stories you're reading, it's very different. Oh yes, Dion Fortune was amazing. She was a female researcher whose original name was, I can't remember, but anyway. And also Annie Besant, who was a very early fighter for workers' rights, women's rights, education, India's independence, Irish home rule. I mean, all this in like early 20th century. She was really cool. I like her. So Crowley joins the Golden Dawn, which other famous figures in the Golden Dawn are Mathers, Westcott. Those are big names if you do research and read the books written at those times. Mathers was in charge and liked Crowley. Nobody else did, because he was really rock and roll, rowdy. He wanted to do his own thing. He didn't, really listen to anybody. So eventually he leaves and he makes his own society called the Argentium Astrum. And basically they have wild parties.
What is with the parties?
It's fun. They wanted to have parties. It also had Edward Carpenter, who I really like. He was an early activist. You should look him up. I can't talk much about what he fought for, but I love him. So around this time, you also see the Thelema. That was the religion that Crowley created. He created Thelema, which was basically the idea, do as thou wilt. Do what you want. It wasn't necessarily as selfish as it sounds, because he was kind of taken out of context sometimes because people really didn't like him. But basically the idea was live your life, the only one you can live, be your true authentic self, was the idea behind Thelema.
That guy seems nice.
Yeah, he was interesting. He was a complicated person. Who was I talking about? Oh, right. This was the period when psychology was being created. This is the era of Freud, the era of Jung, and the Freud was not really into all this stuff, but Jung was. He took a lot of occult stuff and applied it to psychology and to the mind. He had this idea of the subconscious that connects all of us, that there's a cultural subconscious and images and symbolism that all of us have in common, that we see certain things and they mean something to us collectively as a society. He was really big into occultism, and he kind of applied to it an interesting modern twist.
I think I accidentally got Sharpie in my hair.
I'm sure it'll be fine. Okay, one guy I want to talk about who I think is wild, and I just do not get him as a person, is Georges Ivanovich Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff is the last name. He was very influential and inspired some other occultists like Opensky. I cannot take him seriously because he believes some of the wildest stuff. He believes the plot of Final Fantasy IX is real, and I will explain why. He thinks that all human beings are essentially asleep, that we go through our daily lives not actually conscious of being alive, which to a certain extent, that part I'm on board. I kind of get. Day to day, we don't really think about consciously our existence in this universe as people. We're thinking about what we're going to eat for dinner or going to work, that kind of thing. He believes that we don't really remember being alive, that much of our life is lived in a dream, and we have this forgetfulness of being that defines our existence. And we have to work on living a conscious life so that we can truly remember our own human potential. The human potential movement would be a big thing to influence coming traditions like Wicca and modern psychology. Human potential kind of was created around this era, and Gurdjieff had a lot of influence on it. Where he loses me is this idea. This is the plot of Final Fantasy IX. He believes that when we pass on, our souls are absorbed into the moon, and that there is a society on the moon that survive off of the energy from the souls in the moon. And we are all food for the moon. And that is the plot of Final Fantasy IX, my friends. What? We are food for the moon.
What dum-dum would think that?
And we have to break the cycle and free ourselves and awaken ourselves so that when we pass on to the real afterlife beyond the moon. Or else we will be food for the moon. This is a real thing, a real person thought in the world, and I cannot take him seriously whatsoever.
Dum-dum.
It's just, he had so many interesting ideas about being consciously awake and aware in life, and then he goes with food for the moon.
What the heck?
I don't know. Oh my lord.
Okay, is he still alive?
No, sweetheart, this was ages in the past.
That's hilarious.
Oh man. Oh man. So let's try and close this up because we're getting close to modern era anyway. 1960s is another occult revival. The two world wars have ended. People are coming back home. They're dealing with PTSD. This is the age of the hippie. People are tired of wars. They're tired of dying and illness. And so a lot of new research in the occult is coming from people wanting to seek out, understanding of the world they're in and a way to live to get past the wars and everything. A lot of it comes from kind of two different groups. Well, for one, it's all New Age. This is the era of the New Age. New Age basically means a new interpretation of anything that's occult, basically. People kind of very hippie-like, love and brotherhood of humanity and that kind of thing. Really, really big into self-help. There's a huge self-help boom. And with that, a lot of people who get accused of fraud. There was even a group that was so bad about this, like they made money off of people telling them that they could use their new faith system to heal their whatever or another, that those people were brought to court. They were sued. And it was the first time that a religion was brought to court, and the Supreme Court said, we can't rule on this. If we rule on a religion, anybody could sue a religion. We can't say anything. So they didn't. But anyway, they ended up in a great deal of trouble, and most folks left those people alone and stopped giving them money, which good. You end up, unfortunately, with a lot of those folks. But you also end up with a lot of other new movements that are actually out there helping people and doing a lot more charity work, that kind of thing. And a lot of a boom in that kind of thing. Communities, off the grid living, which had really started almost 100 years before. The first off the grid in the modern age was like in the very late 1900s, but it comes back in a big way at this period. What is interesting is you start to see a lot of fusions of Eastern and Western, the way that all these occult groups had kind of wanted. You see a lot of it now, especially as global culture has made it, so much easier with the internet to get access to this kind of stuff, to speak to people from other cultures. Well, that comes like once the internet's around, but from 1960 to today is kind of what we're discussing here. Thank you, Billy. I'm glad you're enjoying it. One interesting division that these folks tend to see in their cultures is you see a difference between what some folks would call Wicca and Druids and the heathens. Basically, this means Wicca is a tradition that was created in early 20th century. Can't remember the guy that came up with it, but it was based very heavily on two books, and it turned out those two books were really wrong. They had this idea that there was this ancient goddess religion from Greece based on Diana and those kind of things that had existed throughout history and been repressed, and that's why people burned witches and all this stuff. It's not true.
With the burning.
I know. It's not true, but most people today understand that, and they kind of know that even though those two people's theories and what was built into Wicca doesn't really define what Wicca can be, but that's where their idea came from. Druids also have a similar problem where their faith and history is based on Irish traditions, and the Irish Druids were all killed by the Romans, and they were oral traditions, so they weren't written down. So we don't know anything really about their culture and their history. So both of those groups don't really have an ancient tradition that's been unbroken for time. But the heathens do. That would be the Germanic and the Norse. Their stuff has been written down and saved and kept, and so those groups like to differentiate themselves because they say, hey, our stuff's been around for like thousands of years and we've kept it and we're keeping the tradition alive.
Because Norse is awesome.
So you do kind of see a difference between those groups where some folks are trying to rediscover something that's been lost, others are trying to keep alive something that's been there the whole time. And that kind of is a very, very broad and thin description of Western occultism. I had more stuff I was actually going to discuss, and I was putting things in order and creating tabs, and then a small child came into my room and said, "Entertain me!" And I got distracted, and she threw an eraser at me or something.
It's a Sharpie. I'll throw
Yeah.
At you.
Anyway. Oh, chaos. That's another thing I meant to discuss.
Chaos theory.
Yes, it does. It is very influenced by Chaos. Chaos basically says, this is all made up anyway, so I'm gonna do it my own way. I really like that one. There's something really...
The chaos theory I learned from Ian Malcolm.
She's really obsessed with Jurassic Park at this point. I really like that theory because it's very refreshing, you know? It says, we really don't know stuff. We don't really know anything about, you know, anything. All this stuff is, you know, made up. Let's just have fun with it. It's also kind of something that comes up in this era. But anyway, thanks for joining me. I know this last couple days have been a little off with my systems dying and then family coming into town, but thank you for being patient with me. This is probably the only thing I'm gonna be able to stream today because I still have this growth attached to me. Hey Shadow Knight, sorry, you did just show up at the end, I'm sorry. But we'll be back tomorrow with normal schedule, a reading at 2 p.m. followed by games, which is probably gonna be Persona. No, actually, we're doing a commission. We're probably finishing playing something tomorrow. I gotta look. We have a couple of commission games that I'm playing, and I have some days set off for that. I think we're doing Handsome Ratchets tomorrow, maybe? We'll have to look. Anyway, playing games tomorrow. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do and you want to see more of it, you can become a member through Patreon or YouTube for as little as 99 cents a month. You get access to extra content. I read poetry, and I read research books, nonfiction. I've started writing up some essays and things in more depth based on the research I do. I hope to post those soon. Lots of extra stuff, hours of content that you can enjoy. Follow me on social media. Follow me on social media to keep up to date with what I'm doing and my plans. And join the Discord to hang out, watch TV, play games, all kinds of stuff. There's lots of cool folks over there. Anyway, I will see you guys next time. Thanks again to all of our members. Handsome Ratch, Phil, Jeff, Pablo.
Hi, Phil.
Billy, thanks everybody for all the support. I love you guys, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.